On an August night in 1943, a captured corporal named Werner Burkhardt sat in a Pullman coach rolling through East Texas and began to cry. As a former electrician at the Siemens plant in Berlin, he knew the mathematics of power, and the sight outside his window was a physical impossibility. Every farmhouse, crossroads, and gas station was burning electric light into the night sky, as if the war didn't even exist. In the Germany Burkhardt had left behind, rural electrification reached barely 1 farm in 5. He was used to the total darkness of Berlin, where every city became a black hole after dusk to hide from Allied bombers. He had been raised on radio broadcasts claiming that America was a starving nation of mongrels and gangsters, its industry already crippled, and its city smoldering under the weight of U-boat blockades. Burkhardt was one of over 250,000 soldiers from the Afrika Korps who had just surrendered in Tunisia. In the largest loss of German men in the West, a second Stalingrad on the Mediterranean, this massive influx of highly indoctrinated prisoners was now flowing across the Atlantic. The United States faced more than a housing problem. They were holding 250,000 men whose entire worldview was built on state-sponsored lies. The strategy for their captivity would rely on the passive, unanswerable reality of American civilian life to dismantle those lies from the inside out. The realization began on the water. Prisoners were shipped west in the holds of Liberty ships, a fleet of over 2,700 vessels built with assembly line speed. Some of these ships were constructed from the keel up in less than 5 days, a rate of production that German officers assumed was mere propaganda until they stood on the decks themselves. During the crossing, officers noticed surface search radar rotating above the bridge. Germany believed itself to be one of only 2 nations capable of producing such technology in military quantities. Seeing it treated as standard, unremarkable equipment on an ordinary cargo ship suggested a level of technical depth they hadn't been told existed. Once in Virginia, the men were boarded onto full passenger coaches, rather than the cattle cars that transported German troops across Europe. They sat in padded seats while American sergeants apologized for the heat, explaining that the car's air conditioning system wasn't functioning properly. As the trains moved through Kentucky, a German chemist looked out at a complex known as Rubbertown. He saw distillation columns rising 200 feet into the air, stretching for 2 miles along the river. This chart shows the scale of the American transition. Using a German recipe, the U.S. built 4 synthetic rubber plants in 18 months. Expanding the chart reveals the industrial gap. Germany's peak production was 120,000 tons. These American plants would produce 6 times as much. This chemist wasn't the only specialist taking notes. Across the transport trains and later in the camps, engineers and industrial foremen compared these observations. Their collective data on American infrastructure provided an undeniable reality. The sheer industrial footprint of the United States made a German victory mathematically impossible. The prisoners eventually arrived at Camp Hearn, Texas, a gridded city of wooden barracks and electric wires constructed in just 120 days. For men like Werner Burkhardt, who lived in Berlin apartments with shared toilets, the camp offered better conditions than life as a free civilian. A German chief surgeon toured the camp infirmary and found a fully equipped hospital. He saw rows of sealed glass bottles of morphine and sulfanilamide, medicines he hadn't seen for his own soldiers. He stood in silence, knowing his patients in Tunisia died of infections these bottles could have cured. In the mess halls, the logistics of abundance were even more apparent. American regulations required that prisoners receive the same rations as U.S. troops in training, with an additional mandate to prepare 10% extra every day to ensure no one ran short. A former hotel chef from Munich watched 2 privates carry 3 whole loaves of worn white bread to a garbage pit because they were surplus. He began to weep, remembering a letter from his mother where she traded her wedding ring for a single kilogram of flour. This constant evidence of American prosperity created a violent friction inside the camps. While younger soldiers began to question everything they had been told, hardliner Nazi officers established secret courts in the barracks at night, threatening and sometimes murdering fellow prisoners who they believed had broken faith. Industrial statistics and extra rations were enough to shake the average soldier, but the hardliners remained committed. To reach them, the U.S. would have to force a confrontation with the moral cost of the war. In April 1945, General Eisenhower ordered that photographs from newly liberated concentration camps be posted on every POW bulletin board in America. He wanted no possibility for these soldiers to later claim they hadn't seen the truth. While some prisoners shouted that the images were propaganda, the German doctors among them knew better. They recognized the clinical patterns of edema and muscle wasting that only come from systemic starvation. Their quiet confirmation to the other men stripped away the final defense of the hardliners. This realization of mechanized cruelty sat alongside memories of the humanity they experienced as captives, like the local Texas church choirs that stood outside the wire on Christmas Eve to sing Silent Night in German for the men they were supposed to hate. By the end of the war, tens of thousands of prisoners were willingly enrolling in the Special Projects Division. They spent their final months of captivity studying English, vocational trades, and the principles of constitutional government. When 371,000 prisoners were finally shipped home between 1945 and 1946, they returned to a continent of ruins. They would have to begin the work of reconstruction in a vacuum of infrastructure and leadership. These men applied the wiring diagrams, medical knowledge, and democratic concepts they had studied in Texas to rebuild. Former prisoners became architects of European integration and senior diplomats, using the lessons of their captivity to help transition Germany from a destroyed Reich into an industrial engine of peace. The German industrial miracle of the 1950s was built, in part, by men who had spent 3 years witnessing a different way to live. They had arrived expecting a broken nation, but they went home carrying the memory of the white bread in a Texas garbage pit, the undeniable evidence that a free society could produce more than enough for everyone.